know who I'm after. Tell me all you know about the Scarecrow.
The Scarecrow?
Scarecrow? Scarecrow! For all I hear, I don't think you'll find him. Many have tried and failed, Mr. Bates.
Ah, he's like the devil himself, they say.
Dr. Syn seems to be, on the surface, a story of high adventure, but it's also a story of heart. And it's that heart, I think, even more than the adventure, that really carries you through.
Dr. Syn, he's basically the masked avenger who has all the attributes of a villain, but he's on our side.
What I love most about the film is taking the dark side of someone's nature and turning that into a very calculated way of creating good in the world.
One of the things I've always admired about Disney was his unswerving ability to see a great story. From the moment you see the Scarecrow on his horse galloping across the countryside at night, this is powerful stuff. You want to know, who is this man? What is he doing? Who is he trying to help?
You trust me? All of you.
The first book about the Scarecrow was Dr. Syn, written in 1915.
Dr. Syn was written by Russell Thorndike. Now, Russell Thorndike began his career as an actor. His sister was Dame Sybil Thorndike, one of the great actresses of the British theatre. Somewhere around 1905, he and his sister were part of an American tour of a Shakespearean theatre company, and they were staying in a hotel in New York. And a murder took place. They were rather shaken by this and couldn't sleep. So they passed the night by telling stories to one another. On that night, Russell Thorndike came up with the idea of Dr. Syn.
This was the era of Sherlock Holmes and Zorro. So he came up with this idea based, I guess, on his familiarity with Romney Marsh.
Russell Thorndike's mother had a cottage in this little village of Dymchurch on the coast of the southeast of England. In the 18th century, this part of the country was very much associated with smuggling. In fact, the Ship Inn, which features in the story, was one of his regular haunts. And even as an elderly man, he used to tell stories about smuggling and the area to anybody who would sit and listen to him.
At the time that the stories of Dr. Syn are taking place, it's a time of heavy taxation. The king in these stories is King George, who was providing unjust taxation against the colonies of America.
In Russell Thorndike's original story, the character of Dr. Syn has a very checkered past. He was ordained as a minister, but then through a whole series of personal tragedies, he became a pirate called Captain Clegg.
After having all these bloodthirsty adventures around the world, he gets back to England, and his friend, who was the squire of Dymchurch, sets him up as the vicar.
By day, the mild-mannered vicar. At night, the Scarecrow becomes the leader of a band of outlaws, like Robin Hood, using the monies from the sale of the contraband to bring relief to the people of his parish.
The story, which was very complex and had lots and lots of twists and turns in it, ended with Dr. Syn's death, which was not a great thing if he'd thought about the possibility of writing a sequel. So 20 years after the first Dr. Syn book had been published, in 1935, he began writing a whole series of prequels to the story.
The actual books are a huge, long, melodramatic story of high pulp adventure.
The dramatic potential of Russell Thorndike's book, Dr. Syn, immediately caught the eye of filmmakers. A film was made by London Films.
1937 was the first movie called Dr. Syn with George Arliss.
In 1956, an American writer, William Buchanan, came across Russell Thorndike's book, The Further Adventures of Dr. Syn. Buchanan thought this was a great yarn, but he thought he could also perhaps make one or two improvements to it. And a book called Christopher Syn was published in 1960 by Russell Thorndike and William Buchanan. This was the book which came to the attention of Walt Disney. Disney immediately bought the rights to it.
Then there was a movie that actually got into competition with Disney. Hammer Films wanted to remake the 1937 version.
Hammer Films, of course, they had the reputation of doing mostly horror stuff.
Now, Disney, when they had bought the rights to the William Buchanan book, had also bought the rights in the name Dr. Syn. So Hammer Films' version of Dr. Syn became Dr. Bliss. The film was released in the States as Night Creatures.
It's a dark film. The Syn character is still sympathetic, but I've always had affection for the Disney version because he's the most heroic presentation of the character on film.
Give my gentlemen the king's gold. Share it among you. And remember, the Scarecrow's justice.
The 1960s, Walt Disney was making live-action films, films for television, and he was also involved with his theme park, Disneyland. And yet he always had time to be very, very involved in the shaping of a script, the casting of a script, bringing together the talents that would be used in those films.
Walt was an amazing storyteller. He could look at a script or a story point and know immediately the best way to handle it.
The Disney film begins with an American branded as a traitor for preaching freedom for the colonies.
You're an American, are you not?
Yes, sir.
Walt was very smart in bringing America and the colonies into the story of Dr. Syn because he made it much more accessible to American audiences that way.
Dr. Syn lived in England during the reign of King George III, just before the American colonies struggled for independence.
Disney knew all too well that a film needed that emotional core. That emotional core is centered on the family of the squire, his two sons, and his daughter.
Harry?
The squire's daughter in the original book was Dr. Syn's love interest, and she eventually became an adventurer herself and sacrificed herself to save him. In the Disney film, that character is still there, but she's the love interest of Lieutenant Brackenbury.
Kate, this is the chance I've been waiting for.
I don't think Walt really felt that he needed a romantic interest for the Scarecrow of Romney Marsh.
Disney was very wise in simplifying the script and not complicating it with an extra dimension. I think the two characters that he played were adequate for the story.
One thing he did want to do, however, was find a part for Sean Scully. Sean Scully had appeared in The Prince and the Pauper for Walt just a few years earlier.
Sean Scully's character is doing a very risky thing for a young man. He is the perfect character to be you when you're watching this. If you're that age, you are the squire's son, John. You're able to participate in the adventures.
General Pugh was staying at your father's, you say? Your head's really in the lion's mouth, isn't it?
Oh, they don't notice me, sir. You're going to let me ride with you tomorrow night, aren't you?
Walt Disney, he spent a lot of time coming to England during the 1950s and 60s. He loved English theatre, and he brings together here a crack cast. And at the head of the cast, you have Patrick McGoohan.
Patrick McGoohan had been in a television series called Secret Agent, but at the time that he made The Scarecrow of Romney Marsh, he really didn't have that prominence that he would get with The Prisoner in the late 1960s.
Patrick McGoohan, he has a special gift for that kind of character where he seems to be always playing two roles. He's gathering information from the other characters, he's putting it together in his mind and planning his next move.
He's very, very elegant and sharp and cool and centered. And then suddenly you see him as the Scarecrow. There's a great slash of a mouth and the stitching around the mask, these sort of hollows for the eyes. And he has a voice that sounds like something sort of scratching across metal.
Cheat, liar, traitor, convicted by your own words.
It's a very, very scary, intimidating presence.
The makeup people, they took a cast of my head, and then they molded the mask to the cast so that wearing it was completely comfortable. Nothing was glued to anything. It was very comfortable.
And he takes the mask off, and his entire demeanor is scholarly and gentle and smart.
It's a blistering performance. An absolute Jekyll and Hyde split personality performance.
Laughter, Sexton. Have you no respect for the dead? Dr. Syn was a kindly sort of fella, but with a will of steel. And I always saw the Scarecrow as his other persona. So neither one was dominant. They each were compatible with the other.
And yet, the Scarecrow is not the real man. The vicar is the real man.
Can nobody stop the villain?
They'll still try, sir. Don't worry, they'll still try.
I love George Cole's performance as Mr. Mipps. He seems to be a slightly shady character himself, but he's also on the side of right.
You want to know about Scarecrow, don't you? You want to get your hands on him, don't you? Well, better you than me, sailor.
You only have to watch the film to see that these are really, really fine actors. You have a cast which includes Tony Britton, Michael Hordern, Geoffrey Keane. These were people who were household names in Britain.
General Pugh.
Father,
Keep out of this, Kate. Press gangs, don't dare mention those blackguards in this house.
I very much like Michael Hordern's performance as the Squire. He's very ramrod and upright, but he's also a very warm, sympathetic character.
He wants to do the right thing by his people and yet is bound to the law.
Leave these people in peace, you loudmouth with your threats. You go beyond the law. Oh, no, I don't.
He's a character who is caught in the middle.
I have my authority from the king. If you have any objection, complain to him, sir, not to me.
The director of Dr. Syn was James Nielsen, who was American. Scarecrow of Romney Marsh was his first film in England.
James Nielsen was a very, very experienced television director.
He'd done a lot of westerns. But of course, Dr. Syn was storyboarded. The directors had to shoot to that storyboard.
One of the most appealing things about the film is the fact that they filmed it on location in Romney Marsh and around Dymchurch.
Much of Dr. Syn was filmed where the fictional events would have taken place. These were all locations that would have been known to Russell Thorndike.
Walt loved filming on location because it gave a sense of reality to the films. And in England, there were these marvelous locations that were particularly new to American audiences.
The church that serves as the vicarage in the film was actually St. Clement's Church in Old Romney.
Walt Disney actually paid for the restoration of that church so it could be used in the film.
Amen.
There's a sense of reality about this story. It's almost as though you've stepped back into the pages of history. From the moment the title sequence starts, you're immersed in the world of the Scarecrow. There's powerful driving song that Terry Gilkyson wrote.
The soldiers of the king did his day. Scarecrow.
Gilkyson wrote the bare necessities for the Jungle Book. He's a songwriter who was able to grab an idea and make something really strong of it.
Terry had a way of crafting words that just turn your head. Terry said, I got this new song I'm doing for Disney, and I need to make a demo. So we worked out an arrangement for him, and the folks at Disney loved Terry's voice. They loved our arrangements, so they just hired us to do the song for the movie.
Scarecrow, he would always help the farmer when there was no gold to bring. He'd find a way for the poor to pay the taxes of the king. Scarecrow, every man would sing.
On this program, we bring you part 2 of our story, which has a strange hero with an even stranger name, Syn.
It was very typical in making these films for the Disneyland television show to do them as weekly episodes with an idea of tying them together and releasing them theatrically.
It's a very clever piece of marketing. 3 episodes that would go out on television in America, but at the same time, a 90-minute story, which can be shown as a theatrical release in Britain and Europe.
Well.
We didn't know that it was going to be a series. I mean, they never told us about that. So, I mean, we just shot a film. I forget what length it was, but that was it.
Ready!
The theatrical version moves very quickly, but you lose quite a bit of the extra texture and the backstory and some of the other characters. Walt knew that he could release it theatrically, he could show it again in television, and his audience would not be cheated because they'd be getting a different experience.
It was a big success in England. There was a novelization and a comic book version. This was a very, very important film when it opened for a family entertainment in Britain.
The film in its various incarnations has an audience terribly loyal to it and really passionate about it.
One of the things that surprises me when you look at Dr. Syn today is just how powerful it is. Immediately it engages you, it locks you into the story. The characters evolve, and one by one, they buy your emotion.
What I think resonates for me the most is that by identifying with this character, taking on a task that demands putting the good of others above their own safety.
A new life, gentlemen, the new world, and freedom very soon.
It's a very ennobling feeling. This was a theme that was part of Walt's life.
I'm not sure that Dr. Syn, as conceived by Russell Thorndike, is anywhere near as moral as the way he appears in this film. But here is a story which manages to convey action and thrills with this very strong, family, idealized, moral feeling. It's an extraordinary film.
Scarecrow.